In the frigid wilds of 9th century Northumbria, a desperate oath of revenge and promise of glory brought Freydis Eiriksdottir into a foreign land stained with Norse blood. What awaited her wasn't the victorious warband she'd fought alongside for months, but a killing field of fallen warriors and a hall of shadows where enemies still lurked. Alone in hostile territory with an axe buried in her shoulder and the stain of defeat soaking into frozen ground, Freydis's fate seemed sealed until a one-eyed wanderer emerged from the mist offering passage to realms beyond. But in lands where blood prices determined one's worth and the line between ally and betrayer was thin as a blade's edge, Freydis would soon discover that the stranger's aid carried a price even death might not settle. The raven's harsh cry pierced the silence of the battlefield as it circled overhead, a harbinger of death seeking the fallen. Freydis Eiriksdottir's grip tightened on her shattered shield, blood seeping through her fingers and freezing in the bitter cold. The pain from the Saxon axe embedded in her shoulder had dulled to a throbbing ache, her body growing numb as the winter air seeped into her bones. She had watched in disbelief as her shield siblings had retreated, leaving their wounded behind as the tide of battle turned against them. "Is this how a daughter of Eirik Bloodaxe falls?" she whispered to herself, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Abandoned on foreign soil without even the dignity of a warrior's death? She tried once more to rise, grinding her teeth against the pain. Her mail shirt was torn and heavy with blood, her own and that of the Saxons she had sent to their Christian afterlife. The battlefield around her was littered with the bodies of Norse warriors and Saxon soldiers, their blood turning the snow-dusted ground into a crimson slurry. The clash had been fierce, but the Saxon reinforcements had come unexpectedly at dawn, cutting through the Norse lines. Their leader, Jarl Hakon, had ordered the retreat, abandoning the wounded to save what remained of their force. Freydis had not expected loyalty from Hakon. She had joined his warband only 3 months prior after her father's death, but she had expected the basic honor of a warrior's death or rescue. No Norse leader with any honor left their wounded to be captured by enemies who were known to torture Norse prisoners before killing them. Yet here she lay, watching as ravens descended on the eyes of the dead around her. First time on Saxon soil, she thought bitterly. The irony was not lost on her. She had begged her father for years to allow her to join the raids, to prove herself worthy of the sagas. When he died, she had seized the opportunity, taking up his axe and joining Hakon's warband as they sailed to plunder the wealthy monasteries of Northumbria. She had imagined returning home laden with silver and glory. Instead, she would feed the ravens in an unmarked grave. The sound of approaching footsteps crunched through the frozen mud. Freydis tensed, her hand moving to the sax dagger at her belt. If Saxon soldiers had returned to finish the wounded, she would not die without claiming one more soul for her journey to Valhalla. She would meet the All-Father with blood on her blade, but it was not a Saxon who appeared from between the twisted corpses. A tall figure wrapped in a gray cloak approached, leaning on a gnarled staff. His face was weathered by age and the elements, his beard gray and braided in the Norse fashion. Most striking was the patch covering his right eye, the other eye a piercing blue that seemed to look through her rather than at her. "You still breathe," the stranger said in the Norse tongue, his voice deep and resonant. "Most here have already started their journey to the afterlife." "Are you here to help me join them?" Freydis asked, raising her dagger with what little strength remained in her arm. The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "If that were my purpose, I would simply wait. The cold or your wounds will claim you before nightfall." "Then what do you want, old man? Have you come to rob the dead?" "I've come for you, Freydis Eiriksdottir." A chill colder than the winter air ran down her spine. "How do you know my name?" The old man crouched beside her, seemingly unbothered by the blood and death surrounding them. "I know many things. I know that you are far from home, that you joined Hakon's warband seeking glory, and that you have been betrayed by those who should have valued your strength." Freydis's vision blurred, the loss of blood and the cold making it difficult to focus. "Are you one of the Aesir come to claim me?" she asked, half delirious. "Has Odin sent a Valkyrie in the form of an old man to bring me to his hall?" The stranger laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "I am no Valkyrie, though I have walked the paths between worlds. I am called Vandil." "I don't know you," Freydis said, her suspicion growing despite her weakened state. "Yet I know you, daughter of Eirik, and I know that your fate lies not here, among the forgotten dead." With surprising gentleness, Vandil examined the axe buried in her shoulder. "This wound is grave, but not yet fatal. The cold has slowed your bleeding, but it will also claim your life if we remain." "We?" Freydis questioned, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I offer you a choice, Shieldmaiden. Die here, unmourned and forgotten, or come with me. I can take you to a place of healing, where you might live to take revenge on those who abandoned you." The mention of revenge sparked something in Freydis's fading consciousness. The image of Jarl Hakon's retreating back as he ordered his men to leave the wounded burned in her mind. If she died here, he would never answer for his cowardice. "Why? Would you help me?" she managed to ask. Vandal's single eye seemed to reflect the gray winter sky. "Let us say I have an interest in your survival. There are few true warriors left in this age, and fewer still with the blood of kings in their veins." Before she could question him further, the distant sound of horns echoed across the battlefield. Saxon horns. "They come to claim their dead and finish their killing," Vandal said, rising to his feet. "Decide quickly, Freydis Eiriksdottir, death or vengeance." Freydis looked at the bodies surrounding her, at the ravens already feasting on the eyes of warriors she had called shield siblings. She thought of Hakon, who would return to their settlement and tell tales of a battle where he had fought bravely. While others fell, he would not even mention those he had abandoned. "Vengeance," she whispered. With surprising strength for his apparent age, Vandil lifted her from the frozen ground. The movement sent waves of agony through her shoulder, and she bit back a scream. "The path ahead is long and treacherous," he warned as he carried her away from the battlefield. "And the price of life is often higher than the price of death." Freydis wanted to ask what he meant, but darkness was closing in around the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was a pair of ravens circling overhead, their wings black against the gray sky, as if the Allfather himself watched her departure from the field of death. When Freydis next opened her eyes, she was in a cave, the walls dancing with shadows cast by a small fire. She lay on furs, and someone had removed the axe from her shoulder and bound her wound. The pain remained, but the deadly cold had receded, replaced by the warmth of the fire. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her shoulder. "Be still," came Vandal's voice from the shadows. "The wound is deep, and the Saxon dogs often poison their blades." Freydis turned her head to see the one-eyed man sitting across the fire, whittling what appeared to be a small wooden figure, with a knife that gleamed strangely in the firelight. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice rough from thirst. "Far enough from the battlefield that the Saxons won't find us," Vandal replied. "We're in the foothills of what the locals call the Wailing Hills. Few venture here. They believe the place is haunted by the spirits of ancient warriors." "Is it?" Freydis asked, only half joking. Vandil's single eye fixed on her. "All battlefields are haunted, Shieldmaiden. The only difference is how old the ghosts are." He set aside his carving and moved to her side, offering a skin of water. As she drank deeply, she studied him more carefully. Despite his gray beard and weathered face, there was a strength to him that belied his apparent age. His hands were those of a warrior, calloused and scarred from years of wielding weapons. The eye patch covering his right eye was made of leather, tooled with runes she didn't recognize. "You're no simple wanderer," she said after slaking her thirst. "And you're no simple shield maiden," he countered. The daughter of Eric Bloodaxe, last true king of Norway, fighting as a common raider in a minor Jarl's warband? There are skalds who would find rich material in such a tale. Freydis tensed. Her parentage was not something she advertised. After her father's fall from power and subsequent death in exile, the Eiriksson name had become dangerous to bear openly. Those loyal to the usurper would kill Eirik's offspring without hesitation. "How do you know who I am?" she demanded. "I make it my business to know the players on the board," Vandal said cryptically. "Great changes are coming to these lands and the kingdoms across the sea. The children of kings have roles to play, whether they know it or not." "I'm no child," Freydis growled, "and my father's kingdom is lost to us. I fight for myself now, for my own glory and place in the sagas." "Is that why you joined with Hakon? A Jarl known for his cruelty and dishonor? A man who abandoned his wounded on the battlefield?" The reminder of Hakon's betrayal rekindled Freydis's rage. "When I recover, I will find him and separate his head from his shoulders." "And how will you do this alone?" Vandal asked. "Hakon has 100 warriors at his command, and you are but one Shieldmaiden." "I'll find a way," she insisted, though she knew the odds were insurmountable. Even at her full strength, she could not defeat Hakon and his entire warband. Vandal studied her for a long moment, his single eye unreadable in the flickering firelight. "What if I told you there was a place where you could gain the strength? And allies needed to take your revenge? A place where warriors like you are valued for their skill and courage rather than their bloodline or gender?" Freydis narrowed her eyes. "What place is this?" "It is called Valhalla's Gate," Vandal said. "Not the Hall of the Slain itself, but a settlement at the edge of the known world, where the boundaries between realms are thin. It is a haven for those who have been cast out, betrayed, or abandoned, warriors who still have battles to fight, in this world before they journey to the next." "I've never heard of such a place," Freydis said skeptically. "Few have. Those who find it rarely speak of it to outsiders. It is a sanctuary for some, a prison for others, depending on what they seek and what they fear." Freydis tried again to sit up, gritting her teeth against the pain. This time she succeeded, though the effort left her dizzy and weak. "And why would you take me to this place? What do you gain from helping me?" Vandal's weathered face revealed nothing. "Let us say I am a collector of sorts. I find those with particular talents and destinies and guide them to where they can be of most use." "Use to whom?" Freydis pressed. "To themselves, to each other, to the future." He rose and added more wood to the fire. "Rest now. We have a long journey ahead, and your wound needs time to heal enough for travel. When you wake, I'll tell you more of Valhalla's Gate and what awaits you there." Despite her suspicion and the myriad questions swirling in her mind, exhaustion claimed Freydis. Once more, as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she dreamed of a great hall perched on the edge of a cliff, its doors open to a bridge that seemed to span the very stars themselves. And standing in those doors, watching her approach, was a one-eyed figure. That resembled Vandal, yet was somehow more, his presence filling her with both dread and yearning. When she woke again, it was to the smell of cooking meat. Vandal was turning a rabbit on a spit over the fire, the fat dripping and sizzling on the hot stones below. Freydis's stomach growled loudly, reminding her that it had been days since she had eaten properly. The battle preparations and the fight itself had allowed little time for sustenance. "Good, you're awake," Vandal said without looking up from his task. "Hunger is a good sign. It means your body fights to live rather than embracing death." "How long have I slept?" she asked, noting that the pain in her shoulder had subsided to a dull throb. "A day and a night," he replied. "The fever took you. For a time, but I managed to draw out the poison. Saxon bladecraft is crude, but effective. They coat their weapons with a mixture of grave soil and rotting flesh. Had I found you later, your blood would have turned black, and no skill could have saved you." Freydis shuddered at how close she had come to an ignoble death. I owe you a life debt, she acknowledged reluctantly. Among the Norse, such a debt was sacred, binding the saved to the savior until it could be repaid in kind or through service. Save. Your debts, Vandil said, surprising her. I did not help you to bind you to me. Your path is your own to choose, though I would guide you to where your strengths might serve you best. He removed the rabbit from the fire and cut it into portions, offering the larger share to Freydis. As she ate, savoring the simple but nourishing meal, Vandil continued his tale of Valhalla's gate. It was founded generations ago by a warrior woman, much like yourself, he explained. Hervor Eiriksdottir had been left for dead on a battlefield in the eastern lands, betrayed by her jarls and kinsmen who feared her growing power. She survived and made her way north, following visions sent by the gods to a place where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. There, at the edge of Midgard, Hervor built a settlement unlike any other. Vandil continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a skald telling an ancient tale. She gathered other abandoned warriors, those betrayed by their jarls, or left to die by cowardly leaders. Together they created a haven, a place where true warriors could live by the old codes of honor that too many chieftains had forgotten. Freydis listened intently as she ate, the food restoring her strength. With each bite, the tale stirred something within her, a yearning for a place where her skills would be valued, where betrayal was met with justice rather than politics and compromise. What became of Hervor? She asked. Vandil's eye gleamed in the firelight. Some say she still rules there, though she would be centuries old. Others believe she ascended to Valhalla, but returns when great warriors are in need of guidance. The truth, as with most legends, lies somewhere between what we wish to believe and what we fear to know. He tossed a bone into the fire, watching, as it blackened and cracked. What matters is that Valhalla's gate endures. It has survived Saxon invasions, civil wars among the Norse, and the encroachment of the White Christ's followers. It stands as it always has, a final refuge for true warriors, a place where the old ways are still honored. Freydis shifted, testing the limits of her injured shoulder. The pain flared, but less intensely than before. And why would the people of this settlement accept me? I am a stranger, the daughter of a fallen king with enemies in every Norse hold. They will accept you because of your skill in battle, your royal blood, and... Vandil paused, his expression unreadable. Because I will vouch for you. My word carries weight in Valhalla's gate. Who are you really? Freydis demanded, frustrated by his cryptic answers. No simple wanderer knows the bloodlines of kings or holds influence in secret settlements at the edge of the world. Vandil was silent for a long moment, his single eye reflecting the dancing flames. I have been called many names across many lands. I have walked the paths between worlds when most men fear to tread beyond their village boundaries. I have counseled, kings and beggars alike. He looked directly at her. Some have called me an emissary of Odin himself, though I make no such claims. A chill ran down Freydis's spine at his words. The one eye, the wisdom beyond his apparent years, his knowledge of things no mortal should know. Could he truly be connected to the All-Father? She had heard tales of Odin walking among mortals in disguise, testing their honor and courage. Are you saying you serve the gods? She asked carefully. I serve the future, he replied. I gather those who might shape it, for better or worse. The gods have their designs, but it is mortals who must execute them, whether they know it or not. Before Freydis could press him further, Vandil rose and moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the gathering dusk. We must leave soon. The Saxons are thorough in their hunting of Norse survivors. They will search these hills eventually. I can barely stand, Freydis protested. How am I to travel? Your strength will return faster than you expect, Vandil said. The healing herbs I used have ancient power, another gift from Valhalla's gate. By morning, you will be able to walk, though not without pain. We have a long journey north, and danger will follow us every step of the way." He returned to the fire and began gathering his few possessions, a small sack of herbs, his whittling knife, and the wooden figure he had been carving. Freydis caught a glimpse of it before he tucked it away, a perfect miniature of a raven in flight. "Rest while you can," he advised. "Tomorrow we begin our journey to Valhalla's gate." Freydis settled back onto the furs, her mind racing with questions. Part of her still didn't trust this strange, one-eyed man with his talk of secret settlements and his mysterious knowledge of her lineage. Yet something in her responded to his words, to the promise of a place where warriors were judged by their courage and skill rather than their political connections or gender. And more than anything, the promise of vengeance against Jarl Hakon burned in her heart. If Valhalla's gate could give her the means to make him pay for his betrayal, she would follow Vandal across the 9 worlds themselves. The night passed fitfully, with Freydis drifting between sleep and waking. Her dreams were filled with battlefields covered in blood-soaked snow and ravens that spoke with human voices. In one vivid dream, she stood before the great hall she had glimpsed before, Valhalla's gate, its massive doors carved with runes and scenes of epic battles. As she approached, the doors swung open, revealing not the interior of the hall, but a swirling vortex of stars and darkness, a bridge to realms beyond mortal understanding. She woke with a gasp, just as dawn's first. Light filtered into the cave. Vandal was already awake, or perhaps had never slept, standing at the entrance watching the sunrise with his unreadable expression. "The dreams have found you," he said without turning. It is often so with those destined for Valhalla's gate. The place calls to them before they ever set foot within its walls. Freydis struggled to sit up, surprised to find that Vandal's prediction had been accurate. Her strength was returning, though the wound in her shoulder still throbbed painfully. "What dreams would those be?" she asked, unwilling to reveal the visions that had haunted her sleep. Vandal turned to her with the ghost of a smile. "Dreams of doors that open to infinity, of halls that exist halfway between this world and the next, of choices that will determine not just your fate, but the fate of many." Freydis suppressed a shiver at his accuracy. "You speak as if you can see into my mind." "Not your mind," he said. "Only the patterns that have repeated themselves across centuries. You are not the first warrior to be called to Valhalla's gate, nor will you be the last." He approached and knelt beside her, examining her wound with gentle but sure hands. The bandage was stained with blood and a yellowish fluid, but when he removed it, Freydis was shocked to see that the deep wound had already begun to close, the angry red inflammation receding. "This is not natural," she murmured, staring at the rapidly healing wound. "Natural is a word with little meaning at the boundaries of realms," Vandal replied cryptically as he applied a fresh poultice of herbs that smelled of earth and something else, something ancient and powerful. "Can you stand?" With his assistance, Freydis rose to her feet. Dizziness swept over her momentarily, but she gritted her teeth and remained upright. Her legs felt weak from disuse, but they supported her weight. "Good." Vandal nodded approvingly. "We will move slowly at first, but we must cover ground today. The Saxons will have scouts searching these hills by midday." He handed her a walking staff he had fashioned from a straight branch, then gathered the few belongings they had. The cave had served them well, but Freydis felt no regret at leaving its confines. She was a warrior, not meant for hiding in darkness. The morning air was crisp and cold as they emerged from the cave, the winter sun providing light but little warmth. The landscape around them was rugged, rolling hills covered in frost-killed heather, stands of ancient pine trees, and in the distance, the dark smudge on the horizon that marked the battlefield where Freydis had nearly died. "We head north," Vandal said, pointing to a gap between 2 hills. "There is a hidden path there, known only to those who have walked the spaces between worlds." Their progress was slow at first, with Freydis leaning heavily on the staff, her wounded shoulder protesting at every movement. But as they walked, her body seemed to remember its strength, each step becoming more sure than the last. By midday, they had covered several miles, following game trails and narrow paths that seemed to appear just as they needed them. They paused at a small stream to drink and rest. As Freydis knelt to fill her water skin, she caught her reflection in the clear water, a face leaner than she remembered, with eyes that seemed older somehow, as if the brush with death had aged her spirit if not her body. "How far is this Valhalla's gate?" she asked as they resumed their journey. "Distance is not always measured in leagues," Vandil replied. "We must travel to the northernmost point of the Saxon lands, then take a ship across the narrow sea to the land the Romans called Caledonia. The Picts control those territories now, fierce warriors with blue-painted skin who have resisted both Roman and Saxon conquest." "And they allow a Norse settlement on their lands?" Freydis asked skeptically. The Picts were known for their hostility to outsiders, particularly the Norse who had raided their shores for generations. "They tolerate it because they must," Vandil said. "Valhalla's gate sits at a place of power, a nexus where the boundaries between worlds are thin. The Picts understand such places better than most. They fear and respect them. Besides, the warriors of Valhalla's gate have aided the Picts against Saxon incursions more than once. They have an uneasy alliance built on mutual enemies and ancient magic." They walked in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Vandil suddenly halted, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond mortal hearing. "We are not alone," he said quietly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Freydis tensed, scanning their surroundings. They had entered a small clearing in a copse of trees, the ground covered in fallen pine needles. At first she saw nothing amiss, but then a flicker of movement caught her eye. A shadow detaching itself from the trees to their left, then another to their right, and a third behind them. 3 figures stepped into view, their bodies covered. In rough leather armor, their faces hidden behind crude wooden masks carved to resemble snarling beasts. They carried various weapons, one a short Saxon sword, another a farming scythe converted to a war tool, the third a heavy woodsman's axe. "Outlaws," Vandil murmured. "Men who have fled Saxon justice or Norse retribution. They prey on travelers, in these borderlands where no lord's law holds sway." The leader of the bandits stepped forward, his mask carved into the likeness of a wolf. "Well met, travelers," he called in heavily accented Norse. "These woods exact a toll from those who pass through them. Your valuables will suffice, and perhaps the woman, if she's strong enough to survive her wounds." Freydis felt rage building within her. After surviving a battlefield and near death, to be threatened by common thieves was an insult she would not bear. Despite her injury, her hand moved to the sax dagger still sheathed at her belt. Vandil placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Peace," he said softly. "These are not worthy of your blade." He turned to the bandits, his posture relaxed but somehow commanding. "You do not want what we carry," he called to them. "And you certainly do not want to test the patience of a daughter, of kings and a servant of the spaces between worlds. Go now, and you may live to ply your trade another day." The leader laughed, a harsh sound behind his wooden mask. "Bold words from an old man and a wounded woman. Perhaps we'll take that fine eye patch of yours as well, grandfather." "I warned you," Vandil sighed, almost regretfully. What happened? Next occurred so quickly that Freydis could barely follow it. Vandil raised his staff and spoke a single word in a language she did not recognize. Harsh and ancient, it seemed to vibrate in the air between them. The clearing filled with sudden mist, thick and unnatural, swirling around the bandits. From within, the mist came shouts of alarm, then screams of terror. Freydis caught glimpses of the bandits thrashing about, fighting enemies she could not see. One fell to his knees, clutching at his throat as if being strangled by invisible hands. Another slashed wildly with his scythe at phantoms that existed only in his mind. The leader turned to flee, tearing off his mask to see better through the mist. His face was revealed, young, scarred, with terror etched into every feature. He ran straight toward Freydis, blind in his panic. Without thinking, she sidestepped and extended her foot, tripping him. He crashed to the ground at her feet. As quickly as it had appeared, the mist dissipated. The two other bandits lay on the ground, one motionless, the other whimpering in fear, curled into a ball with his weapons discarded. The leader looked up at Freydis from where he had fallen, his eyes wide with terror. "What manner of demons are you?" he gasped. Vandil stepped forward, looming over the fallen man. In that moment, he seemed taller somehow, his presence filling the clearing with an almost palpable power. "We are no demons," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "But we walk with powers you cannot comprehend. Spread the word in your hidden camps and secret places. The roads north are closed to your kind. Any who prey upon travelers in these lands will answer to me." The bandit scrambled backward, then lurched to his feet and fled into the trees without looking back. His surviving companion followed moments later, leaving their fallen comrade behind. Freydis stared at Vandil, seeing him anew. "What did you do to them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I showed them their fears," he replied simply. Once again the weathered wanderer, rather than the commanding figure of moments before. "Every man carries his own nightmares within him. I merely gave those nightmares form for a brief time." "Cider," Freydis breathed, naming the ancient Norse magic that few dared to practice. It was women's magic traditionally, though legends told that Odin himself had mastered its secrets. "You practice the forbidden arts." "I practice what is necessary," Vandil corrected her. Labels like forbidden are created by those who fear what they cannot control. Power is neither good nor evil, it simply is. The heart of the wielder determines how it manifests in the world. He knelt beside the fallen bandit, checking for signs of life. Finding none, he closed the man's staring eyes. His heart gave out, from fear, Vandil said without remorse. The weak should not threaten their betters. Freydis had seen many men die in battle, had sent some to their deaths herself, but there was something disturbing about this death. Without honor, without the clash of weapons, simply fear stopping a heart from beating. "You are more than you appear," she said, reassessing her mysterious companion. "As are you," Vandil replied, rising to his feet. "Your royal blood carries power you have yet to fully understand. It is one of the reasons I saved you from that battlefield. Eirik Bloodaxe's line must not perish from this world. Not yet." He turned and continued on their path as if nothing unusual had occurred, leaving Freydis to follow with new questions burning in her mind. As evening approached, they came upon an abandoned crofter's hut on the edge of what had once been farmland. The previous inhabitants had fled or been killed in the constant border skirmishes between Saxon and Norse forces, leaving the small stone structure with its partially collapsed roof as silent testimony to the cost of war. "We will shelter here. Tonight?" Vandil decided, examining the structure. "The walls are sound, and what remains of the roof will keep the worst of the weather at bay." Inside, the hut was simple, a single room with a stone hearth, the remnants of a sleeping pallet, and little else. But it offered protection from the elements and concealment from any searching eyes. Vandil quickly built a small fire in the hearth while Freydis gathered what remained of the dried rushes to create makeshift bedding. As they ate a meager supper of dried meat from Vandil's provisions, Freydis finally voiced the questions that had been building within her since the encounter with the bandits. "Are you truly connected to Odin?" she asked directly. "The one eye, the ravens I saw on the battlefield, the magic you wielded today. These are signs associated with the All-Father." Vandil was silent for a long moment, gazing into the flames. "What do you believe?" he finally asked. "I believe you are more than human," Freydis replied carefully. "Whether you are a god walking in mortal form, A servant of the gods, or something else entirely, I cannot say. But I have seen enough to know you are not simply the wanderer you pretend to be. Wise answer, Vandal nodded approvingly. The truth is both simpler and more complex than the tales suggest. I am bound to Odin, yes. I walk his paths and carry out his will in Midgard when required. But I am not him, nor do I claim his power or position. A servant, then? An emissary, perhaps. Or a reflection. Vandal's expression grew distant. The All-Father has many aspects, many faces he presents to the worlds. Sometimes a fraction of his consciousness inhabits willing vessels to interact, more directly with mortals. I am one such vessel, temporarily granted a portion of his knowledge and power to complete specific tasks in Midgard. Freydis tried to comprehend what he was saying. You mean Odin speaks and acts through you? At times, Vandal confirmed. Though much of what I do is my own choice, guided by the wisdom he has shared with me. It is difficult to explain to one who has not experienced it. Imagine a river that flows into your mind, carrying knowledge from across the 9 worlds. You remain yourself, but you are also connected to something vast and ancient. And what task brings you to a Saxon battlefield to rescue a wounded Shieldmaiden? Freydis asked. The future is in flux, Vandal said gravely. Great changes are coming to these lands. The White Christ's followers grow stronger each year, pushing back the old ways. The Saxon kingdoms will eventually unite, and when they do, they will drive the Norse from these shores. But before that happens, there are threads of weird that must be secured, bloodlines that must continue. My bloodline, Freydis said, understanding dawning. You saved me because of who my father was. Partly, Vandal acknowledged. The line of Eirik Bloodaxe has a role to play in events yet to come, but I also saved you because of who you are, a true warrior with the potential for greatness. Such spirits are rare in any age, and becoming rarer as the old ways fade. He leaned forward, the firelight casting his features in sharp relief. Valhalla's gate exists for many purposes, but chief among them is preserving what is best about our people. Our courage, our honor, our understanding of the forces that shape the worlds. While the Jarls and kings play their petty games of power, Valhalla's gate prepares for a time when the old knowledge will be needed again. And what role am I to play in this grand design? Freydis asked, a hint of bitterness in her voice. She had spent her life being told what she could not do because she was a woman, only to discover that even her apparent freedom to choose her own path was an illusion. She was still being moved across the board by forces beyond her understanding. That is for you to decide, Vandal surprised her by saying. I bring warriors to Valhalla's gate, but what they do with the opportunity is their choice. Some become teachers, passing on battle skills to the next generation. Others serve as raiders, gathering wealth and knowledge from distant shores. Some choose to leave and forge their own paths in the world. The choice will be yours. Freydis considered his words, staring into the flames. And if I choose to seek vengeance against Jarl Hakon for his betrayal, then you will find allies at Valhalla's gate who value honor above political expediency, Vandal said. But remember, vengeance alone is a poor foundation for a life. The greatest warriors fight for something beyond themselves. The fire crackled between them as night deepened outside the hut. Freydis felt the weight of choice pressing upon her, not just the immediate decision to follow Vandal to this mysterious settlement, but the larger question of what she would become if she survived the journey. A seeker of personal vengeance? A preserver of the old ways? Or something else entirely? Rest, Vandal advised, seemingly reading her thoughts. The path to Valhalla's gate is long, and decisions need not be made tonight. Sometimes the greatest wisdom lies in waiting for clarity rather than forcing a choice when the heart is clouded. Freydis settled onto her makeshift bed, her wounded shoulder aching less than it had that morning. As sleep began to claim her, She found herself wondering if she was truly making choices at all, or if the hand of the gods had been guiding her path from the moment she joined Hakon's warband. The thought should have troubled her, the idea that her free will might be an illusion, but instead she found it strangely comforting. If the gods had plans for her, perhaps her life held greater purpose than she had dared to hope. Her dreams that night were vivid once more. Images of a great hall perched at the edge of a cliff, waves crashing below, and a bridge of light extending from its doors into the star-filled sky. This time she walked across that bridge, weightless, suspended, between worlds. At the far end stood a figure, not Vandil, but taller, more imposing, with a raven perched on each shoulder. As she approached, the figure raised a hand in greeting or warning, and she woke with a gasp. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the gaps in the hut's roof. Vandil was already awake, as usual, preparing a simple breakfast over the rekindled fire. The dreams came again, he observed without looking at her. Freydis sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. Is this normal? These visions of Valhalla's gate? For those called to its halls, yes, Vandil replied. The settlement exists partially in Midgard and partially elsewhere. As we draw closer, the boundaries between your mind and its reality will continue to thin. He handed her a wooden bowl containing a thin porridge mixed with dried berries. Eat. We have another long day ahead, and your strength continues to return. Freydis ate quickly, surprised again by how rapidly her body was healing. The wound in her shoulder now appeared weeks old rather than days, the edges knitting together with only a dull ache remaining to remind her of the Saxon axe. How much further? She asked as they prepared to leave the hut. 3 days to reach the coast, if we maintain a steady pace, Vandil answered. Then we must find a ship willing to carry us across the narrow sea to the Pictish lands. That may prove challenging. Few captains risk those waters in winter. And if we cannot find a ship? We will, Vandil said with certainty. The path to Valhalla's gate opens for those meant to walk it. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, heading north through increasingly wild territory. The cultivated fields and managed woodlands of Saxon settlement gave way to untamed forest and rough moorland. Few people lived in these borderlands. The constant warfare between Saxon and Norse forces had driven most common folk to safer regions, leaving the land to wild beasts and outlaws. By midday, they had covered significant ground, Freydis moving more easily with each hour. Her warrior's body, honed by years of training, was recovering at a rate that would have astonished any healer in her father's hall. Whether this was due to Vandil's mysterious medicines, divine intervention, or simply her own stubborn refusal to succumb to weakness, she could not say. They paused at the crest of a high ridge. The landscape spread before them like a tapestry. Dark forests, open moorland, and in the far distance, the glint of water that marked the northern coast. From here we should avoid the main paths, Vandil advised. Saxon patrols are more frequent as we approach their northern territories. They guard their borders zealously against both Norse raiders and Pictish incursions. As if to emphasize his point, the distant sound of horns echoed across the valley below. Military signals, the kind used to coordinate movements of armed men. Saxons? Freydis asked, instinctively dropping lower on the ridge to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Vandil nodded, his expression grim. A large party, moving fast. Unusual for this time of year. Something has stirred them up. Could they be hunting us? The thought of being specifically targeted sent a chill through Freydis despite her recovering strength. Not us specifically, Vandil said after a moment's consideration, but perhaps Norse survivors in general. The battle you fought was significant. The Saxons would want to ensure no raiders escape to bring word back to their settlements. He studied the valley below with his single eye, then pointed to a dense forest that climbed the opposite ridge. We'll head there. Keep to the trees where their mounted patrols cannot easily follow. They descended quickly, keeping low and using whatever cover the landscape provided. The horns sounded again, closer this time, driving them to greater speed. Freydis felt the familiar rush of battle tension. Not fear exactly, but heightened. Awareness, every sense alert to potential danger. They had nearly reached the tree line when Vandal suddenly halted, raising a hand for silence. Freydis froze, listening. At first, she heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the wilderness, the whisper of wind through winter-bare branches, the distant call of a bird. Then she caught it, the soft jingle of metal, the creak of leather. Riders, approaching slowly and quietly, trying to mask their presence. An ambush patrol, Vandal whispered. They're trying to flush survivors toward their main force. He scanned their surroundings quickly, assessing options. The forest was tantalizingly close, but the open ground between their position and the eye, trees offered no cover. To reach it, they would have to cross at least 100 paces of exposed terrain, easy targets for mounted archers. Wait here, Vandal instructed, slipping the small sack from his shoulder. He removed several items, dried herbs, what looked like small bones, and a handful of dark powder. When I give the signal, run for the trees. Do not stop. Do not look. Back, no matter what you hear. What are you going to do? Freydis asked, eyeing the strange items. Create a diversion, Vandal replied, his expression unreadable. The old ways still have power, even in these changing times. Before she could question him further, he moved away, keeping low among the scant cover of rocks and withered heather. Freydis watched as he made his way toward a small depression about 50 paces to their left, drawing the attention of any watchers away from the direct path to the forest. She lost sight of him for several minutes, her tension mounting with each passing moment. The sounds of the Saxon patrol grew closer. She could now make out the soft commands being issued, the controlled movements of men who knew their business. Then it happened. A sound like thunder split the air, followed by a column of dense, oily smoke rising from the depression where Vandal had gone. The smoke was unnatural, too thick, too dark, spiraling upward in patterns that seemed to form shapes before dissolving again. The Saxon patrol reacted immediately, shouts of alarm rising, as they turned toward the disturbance. In that moment of confusion, Freydis heard Vandal's voice in her mind, though he was nowhere near enough to whisper, "Now!" She didn't question the impossibility of what she had heard. Springing from her hiding place, Freydis ran for the tree line, pushing her healing body to its limits. Her shoulder burned with the effort, but she ignored the pain, focusing only on the dark shelter of the forest ahead. Behind her, the shouting intensified, punctuated by screams of terror. She fought the urge to look back, remembering Vandal's warning. Whatever magic he had worked, it was keeping the Saxons occupied, giving her the chance to escape. The trees loomed closer with each stride. 50 paces, 30, 10. Then she was among them, the sudden dimness of the forest enveloping her like a cloak. Still she ran, weaving between trunks, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the patrol. Only when her lungs burned for air and her legs threatened to give way did Freydis finally stop, collapsing against the massive trunk of an ancient oak. She listened intently, trying to discern what was happening beyond the forest's edge, but the dense canopy muffled all sound from the outside world. Where was Vandal? Had he sacrificed himself to ensure her escape? The thought troubled her more than she would have expected. Despite her initial suspicion of the one-eyed wanderer, she had come to respect him, perhaps even trust him. The idea that he might have fallen to Saxon blades while she fled to safety sat ill with her warrior's honor. As her breathing steadied, Freydis became aware of the forest around her. The ancient trees, their branches intertwining overhead, the carpet of fallen leaves beneath her feet, the strange silence. No birds sang, no small creatures rustled in the underbrush. It was as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting. "You made good time," came Vandil's voice, causing her to start violently. He emerged from between two massive trees, looking exactly as he had when they parted, not a hair out of place, no sign of exertion or combat. Only a slight gray pallor to his skin suggested that whatever magic he had worked had taken a toll. "How did you—" Freydis began, then shook her head in disbelief. "What did you do to those Saxons?" "I showed them what they most feared," Vandil replied, leaning heavily on his staff. "For warriors of the White Christ's faith, the old gods appear as demons. I simply gave their fears form and substance for a time." "And the voice I heard in my mind, telling me to run?" A slight smile touched Vandil's lips. "The All-Father's ravens do not speak with physical voices alone. Their message travels on thought as well as wind." He straightened, seeming to gather his strength. "Come, we must go deeper into the forest before the Saxons recover their courage. This is an ancient place, older than the coming of men to these shores. The trees remember a time when gods walked openly among their roots. They will hide us if we show proper respect." As they moved deeper into the forest, Freydis noticed the character of the woods changing subtly. The trees grew larger, more gnarled, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. Moss hung from branches like tattered green curtains, and fungi of unusual colors sprouted from fallen logs. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice instinctively dropping to a whisper. "The Saxons call it the Wordwood," Vandil replied. "Their shamans and wise women come here seeking visions, though few dare to venture deep. The Picts believe it is one of the places where the veil between worlds is thin, a sister location to where Valhalla's gate stands. That is why I chose this route. The forest will lead us true if we follow its signs." "Signs?" Vandil pointed to a tree ahead of them, or what had once been a tree. Its trunk was split and hollowed, forming an arch large enough for a person to walk through. On either side of this natural doorway, symbols had been carved into the bark. Ancient runes, mixed with Pictish symbols and other markings Freydis did not recognize. "A gateway," Vandil explained. "Not magical in itself, but marking a path that cuts through the normal boundaries of distance. If we pass through and follow the trail beyond, we will cover in hours what would take days on ordinary paths." Freydis eyed the arched tree skeptically. She had grown up with tales of magic and the supernatural, but experiencing such things directly was another matter entirely. "Is it safe?" "Safer than facing Saxon patrols," Vandil replied pragmatically, "though not without its own dangers. The path requires that travelers maintain focus. Your thoughts shape the journey in subtle ways. Think too much of fears or doubts, and the path may respond accordingly." "You're asking me to trust in magic I don't understand," Freydis said, hesitation clear in her voice. "I'm asking you to trust in the old ways that shaped our people long before jarls and kings began their petty squabbles," Vandil corrected her. "The same forces that guide ships across starless seas, that send ravens to carry messages between worlds, that forge the destiny of warriors worthy of saga tales." He fixed her with his single penetrating eye. "You claim to seek glory worthy of the skald's songs. Such glory rarely comes to those who walk only the safe and well-trodden paths." His words struck a chord in Freydis's warrior heart. Had she not left her comfortable place in her father's hall seeking adventure and renown? What were the sagas but tales of heroes who dared what ordinary folk would not? "Very well," she said, squaring her shoulders despite the lingering pain. "I will walk your magical path. Lead on, emissary of Odin." Vandil inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her decision, then turned toward the arched tree. As he approached it, he spoke words in that strange, ancient language Freydis had heard him use against the bandits. The runes carved into the bark seemed to shimmer in response, though whether this was a trick of the forest light or genuine magic, she could not. Freydis followed Vandil through the arched tree. a strange tingling sensation washing over her skin as she passed beneath. The ancient wood. The forest on the other side appeared similar at first glance. Tall trees, filtered sunlight, the soft carpet of fallen leaves. But something felt fundamentally different. The air tasted sharper somehow, carrying scents that seemed foreign, yet oddly familiar, like memories from childhood half forgotten. "Keep close," Vandal warned, his voice sounding both near and distant simultaneously. "The path shifts according to its own rules. Those who stray may find themselves walking for years without finding their way back." A shiver ran down Freydis's spine at his words. The trees around them did seem to move subtly when viewed from the corner of her eye, rearranging themselves when her attention wavered. It was disorienting, like trying to walk straight after too much mead. "Focus on our destination," Vandal advised, noting her confusion. "Picture Valhalla's gate in your mind. The image you saw in your dreams will suffice." Freydis concentrated on the vision that had visited her sleep. The great hall perched at the cliff's edge, the bridge of light extending from its doors. Immediately, the forest seemed to solidify around her, the disorienting shifting of the trees subsiding. They walked in silence for a time, following a narrow trail that wound between massive trunks. Despite Vandal's warning about covering great distances quickly, the journey seemed to stretch endlessly, the forest unchanging around them. Freydis began to wonder if they were walking in circles, trapped in some magical snare. Just as this, doubt crept into her mind. The character of the woods changed abruptly. The deciduous trees gave way to ancient pines, their needled branches blocking much of the sunlight, casting the forest floor in deep shadow. The air grew noticeably colder, and their breath began to fog before them. "We've crossed a boundary," Vandal explained, noting her surprised expression. "The Wyrdwood connects to many places across Midgard and beyond. We've traveled much farther north than would be possible on normal paths." "How much farther to the coast?" Freydis asked, pulling her cloak tighter against the newfound chill. "Not far now. Listen." Freydis strained her ears and caught it, the distant sound of waves crashing against rocks, the unmistakable rhythm of the sea. Her heart quickened at the familiar sound. The sea meant ships, and ships meant the possibility of returning to Norse, lands where she might someday confront Jarl Hakon for his betrayal. The trail began to slope downward, winding through increasingly sparse trees. The scent of salt grew stronger, and seabirds could be heard calling to one another above the canopy. Finally, they emerged from the forest onto a high bluff overlooking a gray, turbulent sea. Freydis gasped at the sight. They stood on a rugged coastline unlike any she had seen before, sheer cliffs of dark stone dropping hundreds of feet to where waves crashed against jagged rocks. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds moving swiftly on a strong northern wind. To their right, the coastline curved to form a small, sheltered bay where a collection of wooden structures huddled near the water's edge. "A fishing village," Vandal said, pointing to the settlement. "Pictish, but they trade with Norse merchants. They'll know of Valhalla's gate, though they call it by another name in their tongue." "Did we truly cross all of Northumbria in a single day's walk?" Freydis asked, still struggling to comprehend the impossible journey. "The Wyrdwood does not observe the same limitations as the mundane world," Vandal replied. "What matters is that we have reached the crossing point. Now we must secure passage across the narrow sea." They made their way down a steep, winding path cut into the cliff face. It was treacherous going. Loose stones skittered beneath their feet, and the wind threatened to pluck them from the narrow trail and dash them on the rocks below. Freydis's wounded shoulder protested at the strain of maintaining balance, but she pressed on, determined not to show weakness. As they neared the village, Freydis could see that it consisted of perhaps 20 round stone houses with conical thatched roofs, arranged in a rough semicircle around a central fire pit. Small boats were drawn up on the narrow strip of pebble beach, and nets hung to dry on wooden frames despite the threatening weather. Their approach did not go unnoticed. Before they reached the first houses, a group of men emerged to meet them. Tall, lean figures with intricate blue designs tattooed on their faces and arms. They carried spears and knives, their stance neither overtly hostile nor welcoming. "Halt!" called the foremost man in heavily accented Norse. "State your business, strangers." Vandil raised his empty hands in the universal gesture of peace. "We seek passage across the water," he replied in the same language. "To the northern shores, where the stone circle stands beside the great cliff." The Pict's eyes narrowed at this description, and he studied Vandil more carefully, his gaze lingering on the eye patch. "You speak of Tuath Nan Edar Shaugal, the people between worlds." "I do," Vandil confirmed. "We are expected." Something, like respect, tinged with fear, crossed the Pict's tattooed features. He turned to his companions and spoke rapidly in their native tongue, a language of harsh consonants and flowing vowels that Freydis could not understand. After a brief discussion, he turned back to the travelers. "Few seek that place willingly," he said, "and fewer still are permitted to find it. What business have you with those who dwell there?" "Our business is our own," Vandil replied firmly, "but know that I have walked the twilight paths before, and the lady travels under my protection." The Pict studied Freydis for the first time, noting her warrior's bearing despite her injury. "A Norse Shieldmaiden," he observed. "Unusual to see one so far from her warband." "My warband abandoned me on the field of battle," Freydis said coldly. "I seek new companions with better understanding of honor." A flicker of respect showed in the Pict's eyes at her blunt response. "I am Bran, son of Cruthne. My father is chieftain here. Come, the weather turns foul, and tales are better shared by fire than howling wind." He led them into the village where curious eyes watched their passage. Children peeked from doorways, and women paused in their work to observe the strangers. Freydis noted that despite their primitive surroundings, the Picts showed signs of prosperity. Their clothing was well made, adorned with intricate embroidery, and she saw flashes of silver and bronze jewelry. Bran brought them to the largest of the round houses, its entrance marked by posts carved with spiraling patterns and inlaid with polished stones. Inside, a fire burned in a central hearth, the smoke rising to escape through a hole in the thatched roof. Seated on a wooden chair adorned with antlers was an elderly man whose face bore so many tattoos that the original skin was barely visible beneath the blue designs. "Father," Bran addressed him respectfully. "These travelers seek passage to Tuath Nan Edar Shaugal." The one-eyed man claims they are expected. The old chieftain's gaze was sharp despite his obvious age. He studied Vandil intently, then Freydis, before speaking in surprisingly good Norse. "The one who walks between has not graced our shores in many winters," he said to Vandil. "Yet your coming was foretold. The dream speaker saw a raven with a single eye 3 nights past, flying north with a wounded eagle in its claws." Vandil inclined his head, neither confirming nor denying the chieftain's words. "Then you know why we must cross the water with all haste." "I know that the people of the cliff have ways and purposes beyond our understanding," the old man replied, "and that those who dwell in Tuath Nan Edar Shaugal are both allies and something to be feared." He turned to Freydis. "You, warrior woman, do you understand what you seek by traveling to that place?" Freydis met his gaze steadily. "I seek a new path, having been betrayed by the old." The chieftain nodded slowly. "Simple words, yet true." "Very well. My son will arrange your passage when the storm passes." "We cannot wait," Vandil objected. "The lady's presence is needed before the moon reaches its fullness." "You may command many things, one who walks between, but not the sea," the chieftain replied firmly. "No boat will launch in the storm that approaches, not if you wish to reach the far shore alive." As if to emphasize his point, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind's howl increased around the stone walls of the dwelling. 1 night, Vandil conceded after a moment. We will wait 1 night for the storm to pass. The chieftain nodded, then spoke to his son in their native tongue. Bran bowed slightly and gestured for the travelers to follow him. He led them to a smaller round house near the edge of the village, its interior simple but clean, with sleeping pallets covered in furs and a small hearth already prepared with wood for a fire. Rest here, Bran told them. Food will be brought soon. None will disturb you. He paused at the doorway. Is it true what they say? That in Tuath Nan Eater Shaugal, the dead walk among the living? Not the dead, Vandil corrected, but those who stand between life and death, whose fate is not yet decided. It is a place of transition, not resurrection. Bran seemed both disappointed and relieved by this answer. He nodded once more and departed, leaving them alone in the round house. Freydis sank gratefully onto one of the sleeping pallets, the day's journey having taxed her still-recovering body. Despite the magical shortcut through the Wyrdwood, they had still covered significant ground, on foot, and her wounded shoulder throbbed with renewed intensity. These Picts know of Valhalla's gate, she observed. Yet they seem wary of it. They have good reason to be, Vandil replied, kneeling to light the fire. The Picts understand the spaces between worlds better than most. They're druids and wise. Ones have preserved knowledge that others have forgotten or suppressed. The kindling caught, and he carefully added larger pieces of wood. They know that power always exacts a price from those who wield it or live in its shadow. And what price does Valhalla's gate exact from those who dwell there? Freydis asked, the chieftain's cryptic words having raised new questions in her mind. Vandil was silent for a long moment, watching the flames grow stronger. Separation, he finally said. Those who make their home in Valhalla's gate exist partially outside, the flow of time as others experience it. They age differently, perceive differently. When they venture into the wider world, they find it changed in ways they could not anticipate. With loved ones aged or dead, alliances shifted, entire kingdoms risen and fallen in what seemed to them a brief absence. Is that why it's called Valhalla's Gate? Because it stands between worlds like the threshold to the Hall of the Slain? Partly, Vandil nodded, but also because many who dwell there were rescued from the brink of death, as you were. Warriors whose courage and skill were too valuable to lose to an untimely end. In a sense, they have been granted a reprieve from Valhalla, their time, to enter the Hall of the Slain delayed until they complete whatever purpose the Allfather envisions for them. A chill ran through Freydis that had nothing to do with the weather outside. You make it sound as though we're all just pieces being moved across a board in some game played by the gods. Is that not what life is? Vandil asked, his single eye reflecting the growing flames. We all serve purposes beyond our understanding. The difference is that some embrace their role with open eyes, while others stumble blindly through their allotted tasks, never comprehending the larger pattern. Before Freydis could respond, the door covering was pushed aside, and a young Pictish woman entered carrying a tray of food, smoked fish, coarse bread, and a pot of some steaming liquid that smelled of herbs and honey. She set it down without a word and departed quickly, avoiding eye contact with either of the strangers. They fear us, Freydis observed, reaching for the bread. Despite her unease at Vandil's words, her body demanded sustenance. They fear what we represent, Vandil corrected, accepting a portion of the fish. Change, disruption, the turning of the great wheel that brings some cultures to prominence while consigning others to memory. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the storm grew stronger outside. Rain lashed against the thatched roof, finding its way through small gaps to drip into carefully placed pottery vessels around the interior. Wind howled around the stone walls, and thunder crashed overhead with increasing frequency. A sea storm, Vandil observed grimly. The chieftain was right. No boat could safely cross in such weather. Freydis had spent enough time on raiding ships to know he spoke truly. Even the skilled Norse navigators would hesitate to launch in such conditions, especially in unfamiliar waters. She stretched out on the sleeping pallet, her body aching from the day's exertions. "Rest," Vandal advised. "The Pictish remedies I've been giving you for your wound work best during sleep, when the body can focus its energy on healing rather than movement." Despite her many unanswered questions, exhaustion soon pulled Freydis into slumber. Her dreams were chaotic. Fragments of memory mingled with visions of places she had never seen. She stood again on the battlefield where Jarl Hakon had abandoned her, but this time she was watching from above, like a hovering raven, as her own body lay bleeding among the dead. She saw Vandal emerge from the mist, but in her dream, he transformed as he walked, growing taller, his gray cloak becoming a rich blue mantle adorned with runes, his staff elongating into a gleaming spear. The scene shifted, and she stood before the massive doors of Valhalla's gate. They swung open silently, revealing not a hall but a swirling vortex of stars and darkness. A voice spoke from within, deep, resonant, ancient, though she could not make out the words. She felt herself being drawn forward, pulled toward that cosmic maelstrom by an irresistible force. Just as she was about to step into the void, a hand grasped her shoulder, stopping her. She turned to find herself face to face with her father, Eirik Bloodaxe, as he had been in his prime. Tall, powerful, his red beard meticulously braided, his eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made him both feared and respected. "Not yet, daughter," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered. "Your time in the Hall of Warriors will come, but there is work yet unfinished." "Father," she tried to speak, to ask him the questions that had plagued her since his death. But no sound emerged from her lips. Eirik's expression grew serious. "Beware the one who guides you," he warned, his voice fading as he and the vision of Valhalla's gate dissolved into mist. Not all who walk the twilight paths serve the same master. Freydis woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright on the sleeping pallet. The round house was dark, save for the dying embers of the fire, casting just enough light for her to make out Vandal's form, seated cross-legged near the door, his back straight, his breathing slow and measured. Whether he slept in that position, or was engaged in some form of meditation, she could not tell. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving an almost unnatural silence in its wake. Through a gap in the door covering, Freydis could see stars burning brightly in a cleared sky, countless pinpricks of light more brilliant than she had ever seen them before. She lay back down, pulling the furs around her against the nights, chill, but sleep eluded her. Her father's warning echoed in her mind, raising doubts about Vandal and his true purpose in saving her. Yet what choice did she have but to follow this path? She was alone in a foreign land, still recovering from wounds that should have killed her, with enemies hunting any Norse survivor they could find. If Vandal meant her harm, he could have left her to die on that battlefield. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her troubled thoughts, and she drifted into a dreamless sleep. When she next opened her eyes, morning light was filtering through the gaps in the thatched roof, and the smell of salt air filled the round house. Vandal was gone, his sleeping pallet undisturbed. Freydis rose, testing her wounded shoulder. To her surprise, she could move it with only minimal discomfort, whatever. Pictish remedies Vandal had been applying were working remarkably well. She examined the wound directly, pulling aside her tunic to reveal the injury. What had been a deep, ragged gash was now a healing scar, pink and tender, but closed completely. At this rate, she would have full use of her arm again within days, rather than the weeks or months such a wound would normally require. A noise at the doorway drew her attention. The covering was pushed aside, and Bran entered, carrying a bundle of clothing. "The one who walks between said you might need these for the journey," he explained, setting down the garments. "Your own clothes are blood-stained and marked with battle." These belonged to my sister before she joined the wise women in the northern settlements. They should fit. Freydis examined the offering. A long tunic of finely woven wool dyed a deep blue, thick leggings, and a heavy cloak lined with fur. The quality was surprisingly good, the fabric decorated with the same spiraling patterns she had seen throughout the Pictish village. "My thanks," she said sincerely. "Where is Vandil now?" "Speaking with the boatmaster about your crossing," Bran replied. "The storm has passed, but the sea remains angry. It will not be an easy journey." "I've weathered rough seas before," Freydis assured him, though in truth she had always been a warrior rather than a sailor, enduring ocean voyages rather than embracing them. Bran nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Finally, he spoke in a lower voice. "There are stories about Tuath nan Adar Shaughal, tales told by those few who have glimpsed it from afar or traded with its inhabitants. They say time flows differently there, that those who dwell within age one day for every 10 that pass in the outer world. They say the warriors there are training for some great final battle that will come at the end of all things." "Ragnarok," Freydis murmured, naming the prophesied doom of gods and men that featured in Norse beliefs. "Perhaps," Bran acknowledged, "or perhaps something else entirely. But all agree on one thing. Those who enter that place rarely leave it unchanged, if they leave at all." With that cryptic warning, he departed, leaving Freydis to change into the Pictish garments. They fit well enough, though the style was foreign to her sensibilities. Still, they were clean and warm, and less conspicuous than her blood-stained Norse clothing should they encounter any Saxon patrols. Outside, the village was alive with activity despite the early hour. The storm had brought opportunities as well. As challenges, several fishing boats were already returning to shore laden with catches driven into shallower waters by the tempest. Children ran along the beach collecting debris washed up by the high tide, occasionally shouting in excitement when they discovered something of value. Freydis found Vandil near the water's edge, deep in conversation with a weathered old man, whose white beard was braided in a style that seemed half Norse, half Pictish. They stood before a vessel unlike any Freydis had seen before, neither the sleek longship of her people nor the clinker-built fishing boats of the Saxons. This craft was broader, with high sides and a strange curved prow that resembled the neck and head of a sea serpent. Its sail, currently furled, appeared to be made of hides stitched together rather than woven cloth. "Ah, you're awake," Vandil greeted her as she approached. "And looking considerably improved. How is the shoulder?" "Healing faster than I would have thought possible," Freydis admitted. "I can move it with little pain now." "Good. You may need your full strength before long." He gestured to the unusual boat. "This is Selki's daughter, and this is her master, Nekton. He has agreed to take us across to the northern shores." The old sailor gave Freydis an appraising look, then nodded, once in greeting. His eyes were the pale gray of a winter sea, and his face was so tanned and weathered that it resembled cured leather. "We leave with the turning tide," he said in a voice roughened by years of shouting over storm winds. "1 hour. Bring only what you can carry on your back. If we capsize, I'll not be diving after your possessions." With that blunt instruction, he turned and began preparing the vessel, checking ropes and muttering to himself in a mixture of languages. "Cheerful fellow," Freydis observed dryly. "Nekton is one of the few who regularly makes the crossing to Valhalla's gate," Vandil explained as they walked back toward the village. "He has an arrangement with its inhabitants. In exchange for bringing supplies and occasional messages, he receives certain protections on his fishing voyages." "What kind of protections?" "The kind that ensure his nets are always full, and his boat never founders no matter how fierce the storm," Vandil replied. "Magic, if you prefer a simpler term, though the reality is more complex." They returned to the roundhouse to collect their few possessions. Freydis bundled her bloody Norse clothing, unwilling to leave behind the last tangible connection to her former life. As she tied the bundle with a leather thong, a small object fell from the folds. Her father's arm ring, a simple band of twisted silver that she had taken from his body before his funeral pyre was lit. It was the only thing of value she possessed, having sold her other jewelry to finance her journey to join Hakon's warband. She slipped the ring onto her upper arm, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. Whatever awaited her at Valhalla's gate, she would face it as a daughter of Eirik Bloodaxe, with the courage and honor he had instilled in her. When they returned to the beach, Nekton had completed his preparations. The strange vessel now sat, ready at the water's edge, its serpent-head prow seeming to watch their approach with eyes inlaid with polished amber. "I see no oars," Freydis commented as they neared the boat. "Selki's daughter needs no oars," Nekton replied cryptically. "She knows the way, and the winds answer when I call them." Freydis exchanged a glance with Vandil, who merely shrugged. "The crossing to Valhalla's gate is not like other journeys," he said. "Normal means of navigation are insufficient." A small group of villagers had gathered to watch their departure, keeping a respectful distance. The chieftain stood among them, leaning on a staff carved with spiraling patterns similar to those that adorned the boat. He raised a hand in farewell, as Nekton gestured for them to board. The vessel was larger than it had appeared from shore, with enough room for perhaps a dozen passengers, though today it would carry only 3. The deck was bare except for a raised platform amidships where Nekton took his position, and wooden benches along the sides where Vandil indicated Freydis should sit. "Secure yourself," he advised, showing her leather straps attached to the bench. "The narrow sea can be treacherous even on clear days, and Nekton's methods of propulsion sometimes lead to unexpected movements." Freydis obeyed, though she disliked the idea of being restrained if the vessel capsized. She had seen too many warriors drown, pulled under by the weight of their armor when ships foundered. Still, she trusted Vandil's judgment in this, if nothing else. Once they were secured, Nekton made a series of complex gestures with his hands, simultaneously uttering words in a language that seemed to slide off Freydis's ears, impossible to grasp or remember. The amber eyes of the serpent prow began to glow with an inner light, and without any visible effort, the boat began to move away from shore. No oars propelled the vessel, no hands unfurled its sail, yet Selki's daughter glided through the water, with gathering speed. Freydis gripped the bench beneath her as the boat cleared the bay and met the open sea. The waves grew larger, white-capped and angry, still churning from the night storm. Spray washed over the high sides, soaking her with cold salt water that stung her face and eyes. Nekton stood unmoving on his platform, his weathered hands extended toward the serpent prow, his voice a continuous chant that seemed to rise and fall with the waves themselves. The amber eyes of the carved serpent glowed brighter with each passing moment, until they blazed like captured sunlight. "What manner of vessel is this?" Freydis called to Vandil over the roar of the sea. "One built with knowledge forgotten by most," he replied, seemingly undisturbed by the violent pitching of the boat. The Picts were seafarers long before the Norse or Saxons reached these shores. Their oldest shipwrights knew how to bind spirits to wood and water. "Spirits? You mean not the dead?" Vandil clarified. "Though they have many names across different cultures, Selkies, Nixies, water horses, beings that dwell in the liminal spaces between land and sea, much as Valhalla's gate exists in the space between worlds." Freydis had heard tales of such creatures since childhood, spirits that could take the form of seals or horses, luring unwary travelers to watery deaths. She had always considered them fireside stories meant to frighten children away from dangerous shores. The idea that such beings might be real and somehow bound to the vessel carrying her was deeply unsettling. "Is it safe?" she asked, eyeing the glowing eyes of the serpent prow with new wariness. "Safer than any normal boat in these waters," Vandil assured her. "The spirits guide the vessel, sensing currents and dangers no human navigator could detect. In exchange, they receive sustenance of a kind, What kind of sustenance? Vandal's single eye met hers. Energy, life force. A small portion of Nekton's vitality is transferred to them during each crossing. It is why he has aged so visibly despite the protections he enjoys. Such magic always requires sacrifice. Freydis fell silent, contemplating his words as the boat continued its journey northward. The coastline to their left grew more rugged, the cliffs higher and more forbidding. No signs of human habitation were visible. No fishing villages, no signal fires, only the occasional wheeling seabird and the constant, thunderous crash of waves against stone. Time seemed to stretch and compress during the voyage. Sometimes, Freydis would blink and find that large sections of coastline had slipped past without her noticing, as if the boat had briefly stepped outside the normal flow of time. Other moments dragged endlessly, each wave taking an eternity to rise and fall. Eventually, Nekton's continuous chant changed rhythm, growing more insistent. The boat responded by altering course, heading directly toward the sheer cliff face. Freydis tensed, certain they were about to crash into the unyielding stone. Trust. The vessel, Vandal murmured, noting her alarm. Appearances can be deceiving at the boundaries of realms. As they drew closer to the cliff, a strange distortion became apparent. What had appeared solid from a distance now revealed itself as something else. A narrow inlet, almost invisible until one was directly upon it. The boat slipped between towering walls of black rock so close that Freydis could have reached out and touched them on either side. The sea grew calmer within this natural corridor, protected from the open ocean's fury. The passage twisted and turned, each bend revealing new wonders. Crystals embedded in the rock walls caught what little light, penetrated the chasm, reflecting it in prismatic bursts of color. In places, the stone seemed to have been carved into faces or figures, though whether by human hands or natural forces, Freydis could not determine. Finally, the passage widened abruptly, opening into a perfectly circular bay surrounded by cliffs, on all sides, save for a narrow strip of beach directly ahead. Above the beach, a steep path wound upward, leading to what Freydis initially took to be a natural plateau. As they drew closer, however, she realized the flat expanse was not natural at all, but a massive platform of fitted stone blocks that extended from the cliff edge, and upon that platform stood Valhalla's gate. Even from a distance, the structure took her breath away. It was not a hall in the traditional Norse sense, but something far more imposing, a series of interconnected buildings that seemed to grow directly from the cliff itself, their stone walls indistinguishable from the natural. Rock in places, great columns supported a roof adorned with carved figures that Freydis could not clearly make out from this distance. The entire complex faced the sea, its massive central doors positioned at the very edge of the cliff, opening onto emptiness, just as in her dreams. "Impressive, is it not?" Vandal said quietly. "Built by hands long returned to dust, yet maintained through the ages by those who understand its purpose." Nekton guided the boat to the narrow beach, where it came to rest. With a gentle scraping of wood against sand, the glow faded from the serpent's eyes, and the old sailor slumped slightly, the cost of his magical exertion evident in the new lines that seemed to have etched themselves into his face during the crossing. "Go," he said hoarsely, gesturing toward the path. "They are waiting." "You will not accompany us?" Freydis asked, surprised. Nekton shook his head. "My duty ends at the shore. Selki's daughter must rest before the return journey." His pale eyes fixed on Freydis. "Choose wisely, Shieldmaiden. Not all who enter Valhalla's gate find what they seek." With these cryptic words, he turned away, tending to his vessel with reverent care, checking for any damage sustained during the crossing. Vandal helped Freydis from the boat, and together they began the ascent up the steep path. Despite her improved condition, the climb taxed her strength, the wound in her shoulder, protesting at the strain, yet she pressed on without complaint. driven by a growing sense of anticipation mixed with trepidation. As they neared the top, details of Valhalla's gate became clearer. The carved figures adorning the roof revealed themselves as warriors locked in eternal combat, their stone faces frozen in expressions of battle fury. The massive doors at the cliff's edge were made of a strange, dark metal that gleamed dully in the afternoon light, engraved with runes and symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Before they reached the final approach to the complex, 3 figures emerged from a smaller side entrance. They were clad in armor unlike any Freydis had seen, not the chainmail of Norse warriors or the leather of Saxon soldiers, but fitted plates of metal that covered their bodies from neck to feet, decorated with intricate designs inlaid with precious metals. Their helmets concealed their faces completely, with only narrow slits for their eyes. Each carried a long spear tipped with a blade of the same dark metal as the great doors. The central figure stepped forward, raising a gauntleted hand in greeting. "Hail, wanderer!" A woman's voice emerged from behind the helmet. "You return to us with the daughter of Eirik, as was foretold." "The signs were clear," Vandil replied with a slight bow. "Her fate is entwined with Valhalla's gate, for good or ill." The armored woman turned her attention to Freydis, studying her through the narrow eye slits of her helmet. "You have journeyed far, Freydis Eiriksdottir, only to find that your journey has barely begun." She gestured toward the complex behind her. "Come, the council awaits." Without waiting for a response, the 3 armored figures turned and led the way toward the main structure. Freydis glanced at Vandil, who nodded encouragingly. "The welcome could be warmer," she muttered as they followed their guides. "Warmth is not their primary concern," Vandil replied quietly. "Security and purpose drive all actions at Valhalla's gate. You will understand soon enough." They were led not to the great doors at the cliff's edge, which Freydis now saw opened, onto a bridge that seemed to vanish into the misty air beyond the cliff, but to a different entrance set into the side of the main building. The passage beyond was wide and high-ceilinged, illuminated by strange, glowing crystals set into wall sconces that gave off a steady, unwavering light without flame or smoke. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber whose dimensions seemed impossible given the exterior view of the building. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above them, supported by massive columns carved to resemble the trunks of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Between these columns stood stone statues of warriors in various battle stances, each bearing unique weapons and armor that represented different cultures and time periods. Norse, Saxon, Pict, Roman, and others Freydis did not recognize. At the center of the chamber was a circular table of the same dark metal as the great doors, around which sat 7 figures. Some wore armor similar to their guides, while others were clad in robes of rich fabric. All wore helmets or masks that concealed their features, making it impossible to determine their age, origin, or even gender in some cases. "The Council of Valhalla's Gate," Vandil murmured to Freydis as they approached the table. "The guardians and governing body of this place. They determine who may enter and who must leave." The armored woman who had greeted them took her place at the table, leaving Freydis and Vandil standing before the assembled council. For a long moment, silence reigned, as each masked figure studied the newcomers with inscrutable gazes. Finally, one figure rose, a tall individual in a robe of midnight blue adorned with silver embroidery depicting phases of the moon. The mask this council member wore was featureless save for eye holes from which gleamed eyes of such pale blue they appeared almost white. "Freydis Eiriksdottir," the figure spoke in a voice that might have been male or female, its timbre deliberately altered to prevent identification. "Daughter of Eirik Bloodaxe, last true king of Norway, Shieldmaiden, Oathbreaker, seeker of vengeance." "Oathbreaker," Freydis interrupted, anger flaring despite the intimidating surroundings. "I have broken no oaths. It was Jarl Hakon who betrayed honor by abandoning his wounded on the battlefield. A murmur passed around the table at her outburst. The blue-robed figure tilted its masked head slightly. You swore fealty to Jarl Hakon when you joined his warband, did you not? Yet, in your heart, you planned to use his resources and protection only until you could establish your own power. Your oath was hollow from the moment it passed your lips. Freydis stood speechless, shocked by the accusation, and even more by its accuracy. She had indeed viewed Hakon as merely a stepping stone, a means to establish herself as a warrior of renown before eventually breaking free to pursue her own ambitions. But how could they know this? She had confessed such thoughts to no one. We see beyond the masks mortals wear for one another, the figure continued, as if reading her thoughts. Here at the threshold between worlds, truth cannot be hidden behind pretty words or noble posturing. We see you as you are, Freydis Eiriksdottir, ambitious, prideful, courageous, and skilled, but not yet tempered by the wisdom that transforms a mere fighter into a true warrior. Why am I here? Freydis demanded, struggling to maintain her composure in the face of such unsettling perception. If you find me so lacking, why bring me to this place at all? Because of what you might become, another council member spoke, this one wearing armor of burnished bronze and a helmet shaped like a snarling wolf. Raw potential is as valuable as refined skill, if properly directed. And because your bloodline carries power, added a third figure in robes of deep green. The line of Eric Bloodaxe has always stood at the crossroads of fate. The blue-robed figure gestured toward Vandil. The Wanderer recognized your potential when he found you on that battlefield. He has brought you to us not because of who you are now, but because of who you might become under our guidance. And who exactly are you? Freydis challenged. What is this place truly? I've heard tales of a settlement for warriors, not a cryptic council hiding behind masks and speaking in riddles. A sound that might have been laughter came from several council members, though it held little warmth. Direct like her father, observed the wolf-helmeted figure. Good. Deception and diplomacy are useful tools, but a forthright nature serves a warrior well in many situations. The blue-robed figure rose and approached Freydis, stopping just beyond arm's reach. We are the caretakers of Valhalla's gate, the guardians of knowledge and power that would be misused or forgotten in the wider world. Some call us the choosers of the renewed, for we determine which warriors are worthy of a second chance at glory when their first path is cut short by betrayal or misfortune. The figure gestured broadly, encompassing the entire complex. This place stands at a nexus point between Midgard and other realms. It is not Valhalla itself, but a way station for those destined for greatness, but intercepted before their time. Here, warriors train not only in combat, but in wisdom, preparing for roles they will play in the great events that shape the fate of worlds. And you believe I have such a destiny? Freydis asked skeptically. That remains to be seen, the blue-robed figure replied. You stand now at a threshold, Freydis Eiriksdottir. Before you are two paths. Return to the world you know, your wounds healed, free to pursue your vengeance against Jarl Hakon with whatever means you can muster. Or remain here, accept our guidance and training, and eventually emerge as something greater than you could otherwise become. You offer me a choice? Freydis glanced at Vandil, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. All who enter Valhalla's gate must choose freely, the wolf-helmeted council member confirmed. Unwilling students learn nothing of value, and if I choose to stay, what would you require of me? Obedience during your training, the blue-robed figure stated. Commitment to something beyond personal vengeance or glory. And eventually, service to the greater purpose for which Valhalla's gate exists. Which is? The council members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before the blue-robed figure responded. To preserve what is worthy, in the old ways as the world changes around us. to prepare warriors who will stand against the coming darkness when the final battle arrives, to ensure that not all wisdom and power of the ancient times is lost as new faiths and empires rise. Freydis considered these words carefully. They appealed to her on a fundamental level. The Norse way of life was indeed changing, with Christian missionaries making inroads into traditional lands, and political alliances shifting as kings consolidated power. The idea of preserving the old knowledge, the old ways of honor and strength, resonated deeply with her. And yet, suspicion lingered. If I stay, how long would this training last? What assurance do I have that I'm not simply exchanging one form of servitude for another? Time flows differently within these walls, the green-robed council member said. What might seem years to you could be decades in the outside world, or merely months. As for assurance, the figure spread its hands. We offer none beyond our word. Trust must be earned on both sides. Freydis turned to Vandil. You've been silent throughout this exchange. What counsel do you offer, you who rescued me from death's door and brought me to this strange place? Vandil met her gaze steadily. I offer no counsel, Freydis Eiriksdottir. This choice must be yours alone. I will say only this. I have walked many paths in my long existence and seen many warriors rise and fall. Those who reach beyond personal glory to serve a greater purpose are the ones remembered in sagas for generations to come. Freydis fell silent, weighing her options. The desire for vengeance against Jarl Hakon still burned within her. The humiliation of being abandoned on the battlefield, left to die like an animal rather than a warrior of noble blood. Yet even if she somehow managed to kill him, what then? She would be hunted by his kin and followers, forever looking over her shoulder, her life defined solely by an act of retribution. The alternative, training at Valhalla's gate, learning from these mysterious figures preserving the ways of her ancestors, offered something more. A purpose beyond mere survival or revenge. A chance to become part of something lasting, something worthy of the sagas. And perhaps, most compelling of all, the opportunity to understand the strange powers and knowledge that Vandil had demonstrated. The ability to walk between worlds, to command forces beyond ordinary understanding. If I agree to stay, she said finally, I have conditions of my own. A murmur of surprise passed through the council at her boldness. State them, the blue-robed figure said, a note of amusement in its voice. First, I will not renounce my claim to vengeance against Jarl Hakon. I may postpone it, but the blood debt remains. Acceptable, provided you understand that personal vendettas must not interfere with your duties to Valhalla's gate. Second, I will not be kept ignorant of the outside world. I wish to know what transpires in Norse lands, particularly regarding my family's remaining holdings and supporters. The council members exchanged glances before the wolf-helmeted figure nodded. We maintain networks of informants and messengers. Regular reports can be arranged. Third, Freydis continued, her confidence growing, I wish to understand what this place truly is. No more half-truths or cryptic statements. If I am to dedicate myself to your cause, I deserve to know its full nature. This request prompted a longer silence, tension thick in the air as the council members communicated silently. Finally, the blue-robed figure spoke. This condition we cannot fully meet, not immediately. Some knowledge is dangerous until one is prepared to receive it. But we can promise this. As your training progresses, more will be revealed. Nothing will be permanently withheld that you have earned the right to know. Freydis considered this. Compromise, then nodded. Very well. I accept your offer with these conditions. I will stay at Valhalla's gate and undergo your training. Then approach, Freydis Eiriksdottir, the blue-robed figure commanded, extending a hand toward the center of the table, where a small object gleamed in the crystalline light. Freydis stepped forward and saw that it was a silver pendant in the shape of a gate or doorway. etched with runes that seemed to flicker and change as she watched. "Take this token," the figure instructed. "It marks you as an initiate of Valhalla's gate. Wear it always. It will protect you within these walls and identify you to our allies beyond them." Freydis lifted the pendant by its chain. It felt heavier than its size suggested, and strangely warm to the touch, as if it had absorbed the body heat of a previous wearer. She slipped it over her head, letting it rest against her chest beside her father's arm ring. "The choice is made, the path is opened," intoned the council members in unison, their voices blending into a resonant chord that seemed to vibrate in the very stones around them. The blue-robed figure gestured toward one of the doorways leading from the chamber. "Go now with the Wanderer. He will show you to your quarters and explain the basic structure of your new life here. Tomorrow, your training begins." With that, the council meeting clearly concluded, the masked figures rising and departing through various doors, until only Vandil and Freydis remained in the vast chamber. "Well," Freydis said, breaking the silence that had fallen, "that was not exactly the welcome I expected." A rare smile crossed Vandil's weathered face. "The council is not known for warmth or celebration. Their concerns extend beyond ordinary, human niceties." "Are they human at all?" Freydis asked, remembering the unnerving way they had seemed to read her thoughts and motivations. "Most were, once," Vandil replied enigmatically. "What they have become through their long service here, that is a more complex question, and one better addressed after you've settled in." He gestured toward the doorway the blue-robed figure had indicated. "Come, there is much to see, and you should rest before your training begins." He led her through corridors of stone that twisted and turned with no apparent logic, passing chambers filled with weapons and armor from countless cultures, libraries whose shelves groaned under the weight of scrolls and bound books, training, areas where warriors in various stages of dress practiced combat techniques Freydis had never seen before. The inhabitants of Valhalla's gate were as diverse as their surroundings, men and women of all ages and origins, some bearing visible scars or injuries in various stages of healing, others whole and hale, but with the haunted eyes of those who had seen too much death. They nodded respectfully to Vandil as he passed, regarding Freydis with curious but not unfriendly gazes. Finally, they reached a small but comfortable chamber that Vandil indicated would be hers. It contained a bed, a chest for personal belongings, a small table and chair, and a narrow window offering a breathtaking view of the sea far below. "Rest," Vandil advised. "Food will be brought to you shortly. Tomorrow at dawn, your new life begins." As he turned to leave, Freydis called after him. "Vandil, or whatever your true name may be, have you guided many others to this place as you guided me?" He paused in the doorway, his single eye reflecting the strange crystalline light of the corridor. "Some," he acknowledged. "Those whose fates intersect with the great patterns that shape the worlds, those with the potential to stand against darkness when it comes. And what became of them? These others you brought here. Some flourished under the council's training, becoming more than they could have dreamed. Others faltered, unable to set aside personal ambitions for greater purpose. A few fled, seeking to return to lives they had left behind, only to find those lives dust and memory by the time they emerged from Valhalla's gate. And which do you think I will be?" Freydis asked. Vandil studied her for a long moment. "That, Freydis Eiriksdottir, is entirely up to you." With that, he departed, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Alone in her new quarters, Freydis moved to the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of sea and sky. The sun was setting, casting a golden path across the water, a bridge of light that seemed to lead to distant realms beyond mortal ken. In the gathering dusk, she could just make out the great doors at the cliff's edge and the strange bridge that extended from them into empty air, vanishing into mist and shadow. Valhalla's gate. Not the final destination of a warrior's spirit, but a threshold to something new, a second chance, a different path. She touched the silver pendant at her throat, feeling its strange warmth against her skin, a constant reminder of the choice she had made. The desire for vengeance against Jarl Hakon still smoldered in her heart, but it was tempered now by curiosity about what lay ahead. What secrets would she learn within these ancient walls? What powers might she master under the council's guidance? What role was she destined to play in the cosmic drama that seemed to unfold around Valhalla's gate? One thing was certain: the abandoned Shieldmaiden who had lain dying on a Saxon battlefield was gone. In her place stood something new, something becoming. Whether that transformation would lead to glory or destruction remained to be seen. But for the first time since her father's death, Freydis felt the stirring of genuine hope. As darkness claimed the sky, stars appearing like distant beacons, Freydis Eiriksdottir made a silent vow. She would master whatever skills the council taught her. She would uncover the true nature of Valhalla's gate and its mysterious inhabitants. And eventually, she would return to the world beyond these walls, not merely as the daughter of a fallen king seeking vengeance, but as something more, a warrior worthy of the sagas, a name that would echo through the ages. The path ahead might be long and arduous, filled with tests and trials she could not yet imagine. But she would walk it with the courage and determination that had carried her through battle, betrayal, and near death. For she was Freydis Eiriksdottir, Shieldmaiden. Of Norway, heir to Eirik Bloodaxe's legacy, and now initiate of Valhalla's gate. Her story was just beginning. If this tale of Vikings' valor and vengeance has captured your imagination, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more epic sagas from the Norse world. Leave a comment telling us what you thought of Freydis's journey and what other Viking adventures you'd like to hear. Remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Until we meet again in the halls of storytelling, Skål, friends.